I delivered pizzas every week for 2 years to her family. A day after the last delivery I made to them, I came to find out the wife's dead body was 3 feet away from me. Reddit. What are your he seemed so normal stories? Worked at a boys and girls club for about a year. The directors, counselors, hardly interact with admin. But the main admin who was in charge of running the site seemed like a super nice guy and had adopted 2 foster kids, approx 10 and 12 years old, that actually participated at the club. During our summer training sessions, he was extremely adamant about drawing clear boundaries as far as physical contact with the members, and that anything deemed as inappropriate would result in us being arrested by the authorities. A few months after I quit, I come to find that he had been molesting his foster sons for several years and committed suicide when he found out he was being investigated for embezzling from the non-profit company. My father, being a very racist man, never approved of my best friend when I was a kid. She was black. He would tolerate our hanging out outside but forbade me going anywhere near her house, saying he didn't trust her family. My mom, understanding how ridiculous my father could be, would cover for me on a couple of occasions so I could spend the night at her house. She lived with her father, stepmother, and 4 half-siblings. Nights were spent watching TV, eating junk food, and listening to music. Normal adolescent bullcrap. The father would occasionally give me a weird vibe, but I would attribute that to my dad's influence. Fast forward 6 years, she found me on Facebook and we ended up exchanging numbers to catch up. During that call she admitted that her father had been raping her since the age of 8 and that it continued until late into her teens. It only stopped because a friend reported him. She admitted to having liked when I spent the night because it was one of the few times he would leave her alone. The crap still haunts me. Your poor friend. How sad. There are so many unavenged victims. I grew up in a small town. We had one arcade in town and my friends and I would spend every free moment we could there. The guy who owned it was in his early to mid 30s, looked like Billy Corgan, and lived in an apartment above the arcade. He seemed like a cool guy. We'd talk about video games and pen and paper RPGs a lot. One time it was raining pretty hard and he gave me a ride home in his DeLorean. 1.21 gigawatts, which was totally rad. Mike seemed like a pretty cool guy. Years pass and one morning I'm sitting in the high school library reading the morning paper before class. There he is on the front page being arrested for sodomizing young boys in his apartment above the arcade. It totally blew my mind. When I got home from school that day my mom met me at the door. Did he touch you? The man in the DeLorean. Did he make you do things? TL. DR. Billy Corgan lookalike who owned the local arcade molested children. My mom became convinced I was harboring a molesty secret. I wasn't. While I never actually experienced this, my grandparents have told me a story from when my grandpa used to work on the freeways around Los Angeles. My grandpa was pretty close with some of his work buddies. One man in particular was very friendly, and my grandpa would talk with him almost every day as they worked alongside one another grading and paving the freeways. He even offered to watch my mom, aunt and uncle if my grandparents were busy because he had some exotic animals at his house that the children loved. After a while my grandparents moved away and many years later my grandpa got a call from a detective asking about this man. Apparently this guy murdered young children and had been burying them in the freeways as they were being built. Luckily my grandparents never trusted him with their kids. Holy mother of damn it, for frick's sake, that's some crazy scary crap. When I was in elementary school I had this happy, hippie art teacher. She was very fun and nice. Like she had clay jar with a cork top that said fairy dust on it that was full of glitter. She would sprinkle it on our heads on the way out of the classroom. Eventually she left because she had cancer. Years later, I guess she couldn't take it so she went to a gas station, covered herself in gas and lit herself on fire. She actually killed herself there at the gas station around all of those people. One of the teachers at my little sister's elementary school was shot and killed by her husband who turned the gun on himself seconds later. The worst part? They were having a pretty heated argument in their driveway and about 5 of their neighbors who came out to see what the fuss was all about witnessed the murder-suicide. Everyone thought he was a totally normal guy. After my grandpa died, my cousin and I were talking one night and she told me quite a bit of strange things about him. He had sex with my oldest aunt, his daughter, when she was 13. He was caught molesting the cousin I was talking to when she was 2 or 3. He jacked my dad's dog off and then tried to impregnate his own dog with a turkey baster. Not long before he died he was caught penetrating his pug. He used a paper towel covered in Vaseline as a makeshift condom. Now, I don't really have many memories of him before he got in bad health. He was always kind of a dong in his older age. I never would have expected things like this though. I can only imagine what else he did that people didn't know about. Everybody seems to be focusing on the dog instead of the fact that he raped his daughter. I was the manager at a sandwich place that was in a very bad neighborhood, one of the highest crime areas in the country. I was never too concerned, though, because we were directly across the street from a police station. We had one regular customer who came in 2-3 times a week. He didn't look anything like 90% of our customers. He was middle-aged, clean-cut, always in a long-sleeve button-up shirt and tie. He said he was a teacher and talked about his students and all the great things he did for them. Honestly, I would have said he was a hero. Then one day, he walked into the restaurant with a gun in his right hand, and he was crying his eyes out. He was babbling a little bit and just bawling. He walked up to the cashier, who hadn't had a chance to move away, pointed the gun straight at her, paused, then pointed the gun at himself and attempted to pull the trigger, but dropped the gun instead. A customer tackled him, and a group of us made sure he stayed on the ground, and the police came and took him away pretty quickly thereafter. We came to later find out that he had discovered his wife had cheated on him with one of his students, and he had killed her about 10 minutes before he came into the restaurant. Local politician seemed like a decent guy, as decent as a politician can be. Turns out he hired a dominatrix to throw up cupcakes on him after she drank milk. She couldn't handle how weird it was and how needy he was, so she quit. He couldn't handle it and shot her boyfriend in front of her and then himself. My grandma killed her sister. She was just my grandma before that. Kind of a hardest to me then. Later I realized it was sociopathy, but still just an old southern lady that cooked an awesome cornbread every Sunday. My girlfriend's primary school teacher was always gathering money to help children in third world countries. A few years later they suddenly got a substitute teacher. It turned out they found out his entire hard drive was filled with images and videos of him having sex with small African children. It turned out he used the money he gathered from the students to pay for the plane tickets to get there. I thought it would end up with him just gathering money for himself. Guess not this time. In elementary school and early middle school there was a man that lived at the very end of my road. My road consisted of 4 other houses. Each of the 4 other ones had children. We all knew the guy pretty well, all 5 of us kids, and we'd go over there periodically and hang out in his basement. His kids were all grown up, so he said he liked the company. He always had those cheap but delicious frozen icy pops. He also rescued abandoned ferrets and fostered them until someone else could take them, and had a good 10 plus of them at a time. We loved going over there, playing with the ferrets, and listening to his stories as we ate popsicles. We found out years later that he had been arrested for child molestation when we hit about 7th grade. By that time we all knew full well what child molestation was, and none of us had ever been touched by him. To this day I have no idea if he was wrongly convicted, if someone on our street was lying about being molested, or if he just managed to keep his cool around us for some reason. TLDR, I used to hang out with a possible pedophile as a kid and play with his ferrets. Dude had standards. OBV. When I was in elementary school I took the same bus route with the same bus driver from 1st grade to 5th. My stop was the last of the route with about 10 minutes of the ride where it was just me and him. He was really nice and cheery. Picture Santa driving your school bus. I would always end up talking to him. Then when I was probably in 10th grade I saw in the paper that he had been arrested for molesting children and owning and distributing child pee. One of the teachers at my school, 26 years old, stabbed his 16-year-old girlfriend dozens of times, doused her in gasoline, tried to set her on fire, then tried to run her over with his car and finally killed himself by crashing into a tree at 80 miles per hour. This was a year and a half ago. Another teacher was sent to prison a few months ago for stalking and attempting to poison one of his colleagues. TLDR. Great school. Great TLDR. I had a substitute teacher in high school that was always really nice and got along with all the kids. He was even cool enough to let us have class on the roof of the school, accessible by a window. It just came out recently that he tried to kill his wife by shoving her off a cliff in Maine. He did it to try and get her money that she had recently inherited. Made me second guess all the time I spent on the roof with him. Trying. That had to be an awkward drive home. When I was growing up, my friend Joe's dad was just a random dad. He had a job as the head social worker at this home for troubled teens. Very respectable in our Volvo driving, farmers market going liberal enclave. He was just a normal dad. Then one day years later he's on the news for driving his car into a trailer park, luring a 7-year-old girl into it to help him look for his lost puppy, and then raping her. I am still friends with Joe but have never mentioned the thing about his father. Kind of awkward. When I was a kid growing up in Maryland, we had a neighbor named Walt. Walt taught me how to fish and how to catch Chesapeake Bay blue crabs off the pier behind our house. He was always happy to look after me when my folks were busy, and he had a pretty impressive fish tank in his place. Every day after school I would stop by to see him and he would let me feed his fish. I learned a lot from Walt, but what I didn't learn until 20 years later was that Walt was legally blind. This story is refreshing from all the molesting and murder stories. Still has a great twist. When I was a kid, I was in a theater class with an amazing instructor. He was funny, talented, and a great teacher. One day, my parents and I were driving somewhere when they asked me if the instructor ever did something to you. You'd tell us, right? I had no idea what they were talking about. A few days later, I learned that the instructor had been arrested for molesting 2 boys at the school that he worked at as his day job. My mom asked me at least once a week if anyone had been touching me or asking me to keep secrets for them. I have no idea if this was ever pointed toward anyone, but she asked so much I was pretty sure something was wrong with me since no one was actually touching me despite this apparent danger. When I was a kid, my mom was extremely neurotic about us being abducted by some adult in a windowless white van or something. We lived like 2 blocks away from our elementary school, which was a straight line from our front door basically. You could see it pretty much if you went to the sidewalk. But she was a concerned mother. So, between our home and our school there were a few apartments. A nice old man always stood outside one of the apartments. My mom and him chatted every day. He was always nice to my brother and I, and my mom told us that if we were ever in trouble to run to him. We walked by him every day and he'd nod and smile and say hello to us. One day my mom goes to the corner store and as you enter they had a newspaper rack on the left side. As my mom comes in to grab a few things for dinner, something catches her eye. My mom didn't buy newspapers or even pay much attention to them, but it just happened to snag her eye. She looks down and there he is on the cover. He had raped and molested a bunch of kids like 30-40 years before up in residential schools. I'm Canadian. They had finally found him and had arrested him. He was a child molester. My mom, until the day she died, I'm convinced never forgave herself for that. She felt like the worst parent ever, even though nothing ever happened to us, nor could she have had any way of knowing. She hated herself for that. She took it really hard. Every day we walked by a child molester and my mom told us to go to him if we were ever in trouble. Holy crap. If I have kids, I'm telling them to go to the grumpiest old sucker in the neighborhood for help. When I was in junior high, I was in the Boy Scouts, late 1980s. A new kid joined our troop and he lived near me, so we hung out. His dad was an OBGYN and former Air Force officer. I always had wanted to be in the AF and his son did too. We used to practice our first aid and such over there and they seemed like such a normal family. Over time we lost contact with each other. Then while in high school the father is arrested and is in the local paper. Ends up the father had been sexually assaulting his patients for years. The son ended up leaving the area, but I did see his graduation pic from West Point, so at least he made it through. Growing up I had a friend who lived across the street in our upper middle class neighborhood. Her dad owned a protein shake and supplement shop in our town, and one day he was arrested for producing and distributing date rape drugs in the back room of the store. It also came out that her mother was a stripper at the local club. In retrospect, after all this came out, I remembered a time that we were hanging out, and my friend had a bag of rock candy. It was legit rock candy, not sketchy stuff. She offered me some, saying, "Try this candy, it makes women lose their minds." Weird sayings like that go in one ear and out the other until something like date rape daddy happens. Her line is just too perfect. This is more of a he didn't seem so bad, but my literature teacher in high school was also my neighbor. One time he got a death threat by phone from some kid he flunked. My teacher called the cops but they didn't care. So he sent his wife and kids to a neighbor's, got out a shotgun and sat in a lawn chair in his driveway in the middle of a nice suburban neighborhood reading Paradise Lost. The kid drove up 2 hours later and peeled off when he saw him sitting there. Kid on my DI team in middle school never cut his freaking toenails. Super nice kid, a little awkward. Wound up beating his mom with a baseball bat to death with his sister and then fleeing to New Mexico. It's the long toenailed ones you gotta watch. I wouldn't exactly call him normal, but my music teacher throughout middle school was a super nice guy. Very friendly, always talked in a really calm and monotone voice. He was kind of strange, but nothing too extreme. Just little things that make you stop and wonder for a second. When I was in, I think 8th grade, it was discovered that he had hundreds of images of child pee on his computer. He would go on chat sites and trade photos of them. One time he ended up chatting with an undercover cop a few states away and they busted him. He didn't put a fight. He admitted it all. Thankfully none of the pictures were of kids from our town and he never tried to do anything with anyone, but still. In middle school, homerooms and homeroom seating were organized by last name, so for all 3 years I sat next to the same kid. He was nice enough, a little quiet, drew a lot. Anyways, fast forward to high school and he's arrested for bringing a gun to school and planning on doing a shoot up. Scared me shitless. This one's kind of sad shocking. I had the cheeriest mother ever ride my bus back in high school, and he wasn't the annoying kind. Like genuinely cheerful, happy to greet the world every day and was always nice and outgoing towards everyone. He seemed like one of those kids who was going places, like someone who was going to do good in the world on a major scale and be a complete success in life. So my friends and I are sitting with him on the bus, chatting with him as we did most bus rides because our stops are the last two so everyone else is gone. I remember exactly what he said. Well, it's been another wonderful chat, guys. I'll catch you guys tomorrow and have a great rest of the day. He was honestly like something out a movie. He gave his signature cheery smile, said goodbye to the bus driver, and bounded off the bus to his house. The next day I get on the bus and he isn't there. The bus driver looked a bit shaken up, but I didn't put it together until after school was in session. The principal got on the PA system and explained cheery kid had killed himself. Asked for a moment of silence, and did the usual if you, or someone you know needs to talk to someone, someone is always here thing. It was absolutely shocking to hear. There were rumors, of course, but I didn't get the true story until a few weeks later. My mom and his mom were friends through PTA, although him and I never hung out outside of school. Anyways, his mom just kind of let it all out to my mom one night over a random phone call. I guess she just needed someone to talk to. Basically, after school cheery kid would get home about 5, maybe 10 minutes, before his mother did. Their house was only about a minute walk from his bus stop. Anyways, she pulls into the driveway at her usual time and is stepping out of her car when she hears a gunshot. She runs inside to find her son laying on his bed, dead, with his father's pistol in his hand and his brains all over his wall. Meaning 5-10 minutes after cheery kid gave my friends and I his cheery goodbye, he blew his brains out. Unless he called someone, we were the last people to actually have a conversation with him. He gave no warning, had no apparent motive, hadn't had any known major event happen to him recently prior to that, nothing. He just left one thing behind, one tiny thing, and that was a small note left on his desk that read "Frick all of you." Did not expect that last part. It makes you wonder what was really going through his mind. Back around 2005-2004, my group of friends befriended a guy John who said he was in middle school. They rode BMX bikes and he got along with them because he rode BMX bikes. I met him once and he gave me that hug pat on the back thing that kinda racist black people do. Anywho, one of my friends Joe started to hang out more and more with him and John told him that he was kicked out of his house and had nowhere to live. My friend Joe invited him to stay at their place for as long as he needed to. Fast forward a month later and the police break down their front door and arrest John. It turns out he was a 30-year-old guy who pretended to be 13 and raped kids. TL. DR. Gave a one-armed hug to a 13-year-old kid that turned out to be a 30-year-old child rapist. When I was a kid, my family would go over to the home of a friend of my dad's. My siblings and I would play with his kids, and we were all pretty good friends. Fast forward a decade to a few years. The guy's oldest son was in the Navy. He had a wife and couple of kids, what most would think was a good life. But he had to go and destroy his entire life by ordering and having delivered to the military base he was stationed at, child P videos. Needless to say, he was in prison last I heard, and his wife had divorced him and had full custody of the kids. This seems to be appropriate. I kid you not. Last night, a friend and her mother were shot and killed in her house down the road from me. The culprit? Her father. The girl was a track star, and a great girl with a promising future. Very friendly and compassionate. Life taken short by her father. I found out this morning and couldn't believe it. Her dad seemed like such a good guy. It truly is the last guy you would suspect. For a few years, my husband and I would go to the same gas station daily for cigarettes, soda, whatever. The owner was pleasant and gave my husband deals on stuff sometimes, but not me. He went more often than I did. I used to tease my husband by saying the owner was just trying to get into his pants by treating him nicely. One day I stopped in, and while I was waiting in line I looked over at the newspapers. On the front page was a mugshot of the gas station owner, along with a headline about how he drugged his young male employees and sexually assaulted them in his house. Growing up I had a neighbor that was about 3 years older than me. I was probably 9-11 at the time. He was a very nice guy with a weird family. Now for context, I live in the country part of Texas and you never knew the type of people you would run across. This kid would come down to our house and play video games with us, eat dinner with us, and even gave us second-hand toys as presents on our birthdays. I had only been to his house once in the 3-4 years we were friends, even though it was only a 3-minute walk. He was very polite and thankful for anything that was given to him. Never spoke out of turn and was a yes, mom, yes, sir kind of guy. I think this is most certainly due to his father. He was a biker dude and was very strict on the kid and even the dogs in the house. I remember the one time I went there and I picked up a ruler they had on the counter and the dogs cowered away. My friend informed me that his was what his dad used to reprimand the dogs with. They knew the pain associated with that tool and wanted nothing to do with it. We have a local grocery store that my mom and I would frequent often, and whenever my mom would spot his dad she would make sure that we didn't run into him so she wouldn't have to talk to him. He seemed like an all-around bad person. Well, one night we come home to a lot of emergency lights in front of his house along with a news van. My mom's first reaction was to take us home as fast as she could because she knew it wouldn't be good. She thought right. We found out from a neighbor a few minutes later that was over there snooping around that the boy had had enough and snapped. He took an assault rifle and shot his father several times. The day prior to the shooting was the last time that I saw my friend. He had come over to give me a SNES game that he knew I liked. I didn't know at that time that I would never see him again, nor did I ever know about the pain that he was going through at home with an abusive alcoholic father. Not as severe as the other examples, but back when I was in marching band in high school, our assistant director was pretty cool. He had graduated from the school like 8 years earlier and was totally chill, to contrast the director himself, who was known for having a bit of a temper. Everyone called him Mom as a joke and he was just a cool dude. There was talks about him maybe taking over the middle school band program eventually, like a year or two after I graduated. Turns out he had been stealing money from the band program's fundraising, to the tune of a few thousand. Not wanting to ruin this guy's life, though, the director just kicked him out and told him to get his act together. A few years later, he was arrested for stealing another couple thousand from multiple band programs in the state. At least he wasn't a pedo. My lawyer shot himself in the head in front of his wife who just had a baby. This happened a week before my disposition. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.